It's a pleasure to be here this morning. I'm Julie Moore, and do I just point when I would like a slide to go forward? Oh, I do. All right, I got the clicker. I think I can handle this. So I'm going to give everyone here a whirlwind tour through the Global Warming Solutions Act, and then hope we'll be able to clear up anything I step over during the question and answer piece. So as probably all of you in this room are aware, the Global Warming Solutions Act became law in September of last year. It has a number of different elements. The one that gets the most attention is changing our greenhouse gas emissions reduction goals to requirements, but there are also elements of the act that speak to resilience and adaptation, carbon sequestration, smart growth, getting to net zero carbon, and looking at land use policies. There's a fairly clear sequence of work that's established in the Global Warming Solutions Act, and it includes 5 subcommittees where the bulk of the work is being done currently. We have a 23-member council that meets approximately monthly, but these subcommittees that have brought in additional members beyond just the councilors themselves largely are meeting weekly, and they're all using a fairly similar approach for their work, looking at existing programs, identifying gaps, and then coming up with approaches to help fill those gaps, including figuring out how much those gap filling strategies will cost. Ultimately, we're going to need to develop a suite of monitoring and assessment strategies to ensure that our investments are having the desired effect, identify rules that will need to be adopted by ANR, as well as work that's likely to be required by the legislature, and adopt an initial climate action plan by December 1st of this year. The CAP has to be updated at least once every 4 years, but can obviously be updated more frequently. And I think generally there's an understanding that this initial document will be updated sooner than not. The framework for developing those actionable or operational tasks starts at a fairly high level, looking at pathways not dissimilar to the presentation you just saw from EAN, and we've drawn extensively from that work, and then drilling down into strategies and ultimately into actions. And these are really those operational tasks. Throughout this work, we are leading with equity as a core component. One of our subcommittees is a Just Transition subcommittee, and they have established a set of guiding principles, which is what is shown on the right-hand side of that slide. And these are intended to keep the council and the subcommittees centered on equity and inclusion principles as they develop strategies that will ultimately be brought up into the climate action plan. They're particularly useful in areas where we may not have traditionally applied a policy or an equity lens to policy, or areas where we could unintentionally reinforce some of the historic disadvantages that we know minority communities are burdened with. So this is just a way of representing kind of the importance and the weight placed on those equity considerations. It's one of sort of the 5 overarching evaluative criteria that we will be using in looking at different actions. At the bottom, you see progress towards the Global Warming Solutions Act requirements. I sometimes think of that as impact, the technical feasibility of those actions, cost effectiveness, understanding any co-benefits that may derive in addition to those equity considerations. And the clouds on the right are intended to show that there isn't really a bright line between some of the strategies that may have benefits around greenhouse gas mitigation, from resilience and adaptation, from sequestration. And we're so looking at things that are specific to each one of those missions, but also have cross-cutting opportunities. As I noted, our process to date has really been at that subcommittee level. Subcommittees prepared draft pathways that were shared with the council about a month ago at this point. And now we've engaged a technical consultant to start to evaluate those potential pathways. And we'll get to a bit more detail on that in a moment. In addition, this readies us for a public engagement process. We did an initial round of public engagement earlier this summer, focused on a series of roundtables and stakeholder outreach, particularly targeting the underrepresented and hard to reach areas of the Vermont community, and trying to make sure we are bringing a broad cross section of Vermonters into this process. Later this month, we will be hosting a series of both in-person and online events, sharing those draft pathways and encouraging feedback and thoughts from the community. I think given the aggressive nature of the timeline for developing that initial climate action plan, it's important to recognize that we know that the public engagement as well as the rest of the work will need to continue past that December 1st timeline, and have plans with the contractor we currently have in place to continue outreach and engagement efforts through the first quarter of 2022. And then just to give a sense quickly of where we sit with the technical analyses that really underpin the development of the plan. We have contracted with Cadmus and the Energy Futures Group to do much of this work. They are currently in the process of evaluating a set of different mitigation pathways and scenarios, and we anticipate getting initial results from that work back later this month so that the council can start to deliberate and refine. What we'll need to follow immediately on the heels of those technical analyses is the economic modeling to make sure we know not just how the work would get done, but what it will cost to actually implement it. There's another really important process that's going on in parallel to this, and TJ is going to talk a little bit more about that in a moment, but it is the comprehensive energy plan. And we've taken significant efforts in both initiatives to ensure that that they're talking to each other, that we have a consistent framework. Frankly, we're using the same model and same modeler to do a lot of the underlying work, so that hopefully we get that comprehensive picture to the benefit of all Vermonters. And then just a few key takeaways I'd leave you with. We will have that initial climate action plan adopted by the council by December 1st. Many of the strategies and actions are likely to require legislative action to implement. So the work will continue aggressively moving forward in the coming legislative session. I think this graph, I always just use it as a reminder of the significant greenhouse gas emissions reductions that are required to achieve our 2025 requirement, as well as those out 2030 and 2050 requirements. And I think the final piece that we're still wrestling with as a council is how to really drive that balance between investments in greenhouse gas emissions reductions with what we also know to be necessary and important investments in adaptation, landscape level resilience, and carbon sequestration efforts. So certainly more to come. That's a real whirlwind tour, and I will turn it over now to TJ to give an equally fast overview of the comprehensive energy planning process.
Thanks, Julie. And it may not just be equally as fast, but perhaps even faster here to keep us on schedule. So when we talk about the comprehensive energy plan, I always like to start with kind of the foundation of what that plan and what our energy policy looks like as directed by statute. So really, I put this up because it has a lot of foundational principles of reliability, security, sustainability, meeting our greenhouse gas requirements, affordability, and cost effectiveness. And those are really have been the underpinnings of our energy policy in the past and are the underpinnings of our energy plan going forward. So the comprehensive energy plan itself, we've had a number of versions for a while. It is required by statute, and it's a 20-year projection of use, supply, and the environmental effects of our energy use. It's also our electric plan. We have a requirement to do an electric plan as well. At one point, these were two separate plans, but even more and more as we electrify and our energy uses become more intertwined, it really makes a lot of sense to really treat these as one cohesive plan. In addition, the plan in 2015, Act 174 was passed. That was for enhanced energy planning for municipalities and regional planning commissions. The plan needs to give guidance to those more local levels of government on energy planning, so we can our communities can take into their own hands their energy future. It also gives them substantial deference in terms of siting considerations going forward in their communities. And then, of course, that we must be consistent with the greenhouse gas reduction requirements. And I think we would have done it anyway, but it's one of the reasons that we're so intertwined here, that the comprehensive energy plan is required to be informed by the climate action plan. The climate action plan is required to be informed by the comprehensive energy plan. So we really need to go together with one path here. Where are we starting with the energy plan? In 2011, we created the 90% renewable by 2050 goal. That it was maintained in 2016 and is a starting point here as well. And then our greenhouse gas reduction requirements. We're not backing away from anything that has already been set as visions in the previous plans. But going forward, you may remember the last plan as having the vision, maintaining that vision, and then over 300 recommendations of actions to take. And there was a little bit missing, in our opinion, in the department's opinion anyway, that there was not the strategic path forward to kind of tie those actions to the vision and actually make cohesive progress going forward. So for our 2022 plan, we're focusing on a strategic plan that really looks at the trade-offs among policies. I put up that energy policy earlier, but how do they, what do you give up if you pursue one action? Are there any win-win-win strategies, as Jared pointed out earlier? And look at it from various perspectives, not only the societal perspective where we are really looking at our greenhouse gas emissions reductions, but also what does that mean for the customer? Does adding a heat pump increase costs in their territory, their daily operating costs? What does it mean for affordability? And then what does it mean for the public investment necessary to move us forward? How do we balance all those trade-offs? And looking at uncertainties that could affect the policy success going forward. A couple of themes for the energy plan: equity, tying in with a big theme of the climate action plan, but also grid optimization. As we do electrify, how do we make sure the grid is optimized to operate efficiently and at least cost? Our timeline is also aggressive here, especially at this point. I'll point out, we had a number of stakeholder forums, topical stakeholder forums in the buildings, transportation, and electricity sectors, where we partnered with the Climate Action Plan, some council members and subcommittee members to really get some technical expertise and feedback on these specific sectors. And we did that in August. Those followed on some regional forums where we partnered with the regional planning commissions and municipalities to get feedback on barriers for those communities, the real on the ground implementation barriers to moving forward and what they needed out of the plan. Julie mentioned the modeling. I removed slides from this just for purposes of time, but it's called the LEAP model, and it not only gets us mitigation pathways, but it compares it to a business as usual and should have cost estimates of what the mitigation strategies, what the benefits and the costs are, and what the net costs are, which is really important. We'll have another set of public hearings. We're partnering and participating in the Climate Action Plan hearings, meetings next week, and then a plan adopted in January. And again, this bar on the bottom, coordination with the council, is really imperative. And just to tie this all together, there's a lot of overlap. You can see this Venn diagram here. The center is really the most. GHG reduction targets, energy sector analysis, public engagement efforts, equity. These are all really consistent tasks and efforts and issues that are going to be represented in both and are really well coordinated. But the plans aren't the same, and still a reason for both plans. Climate Action Plan really will focus more on climate adaptation and non-energy greenhouse gases than the Comprehensive Energy Plan does, sequestration, while the Comprehensive Energy Plan maintains that focus on renewable energy development and the standards for local planning, among other things. So there are independent different paths forward, but a whole lot of overlap, which is why we're partnering so much. And then I put this up for posterity, but there's a lot of more opportunities to participate in both the Comprehensive Energy Plan and the Climate Action Plan. And please do feedback here, feedback afterwards, written feedback, or just communicating directly with the department as far as the Comprehensive Energy Plan is concerned. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Julie and TJ and Chris for being here for questions as well. We have a couple that have come in. The first one is, could you please elaborate on the methods for gathering feedback for hard to reach populations and avoiding receiving input only from advocates?
Sure, I'll start and Chris may want to weigh in on this too. But what we have done is worked with a contractor, Climate Access and Rise, that has engaged with our Just Transitions Committee to identify particular communities or sectors within Vermont society that are going to either be disproportionately impacted or likely to have not previously participated, and developed some very specific outreach strategies. We hosted a series of sector-based roundtables. So invited, for example, the BIPOC community to be part of a particular stakeholder group and receive input and feedback. We've also tried to make these feel more welcoming by minimizing, frankly, the number of counselors participating directly, knowing that it could have felt overwhelming for folks to have 23 counselors plus subcommittee members in the room. And I think the result is some very honest feedback that is then informed the process going forward. Obviously, we wish there was more time. That's probably our biggest challenge to doing the work the way we would like to do the work, and recognizing that evening meetings, whether virtual or in person, aren't the be all and end all. But we are committed to continuing to solicit that input and feedback and try to meet people where they're at. Oh, Chris, do you want to add?
I'll just add one thing, and we testified to this before House Energy Committee, which is that we're really characterizing the plan as an initial plan, and the importance of, hopefully we'll be past the Delta variant, the Mu variant won't be any worse, but really getting to where people are after that initial plan is released and helping folk understand that we need a lot of feedback on that when it goes out. And the legislators, at least in that committee, recognize they need to get their constituents out. But what I would urge, I imagine most people in this room are advocates. We really need to get your friends and neighbors, and frankly, people who don't believe in this, don't care about it, engaged in the discussions now and the feedback that we're getting now. But there's going to have to be a lot of work done after that initial plan's released into the wild, and get a lot of feedback, and the council's going to have to keep working.
Thanks, Chris and Julie. We have a lot of questions coming in. Unfortunately, we're not going to have time for all of them, but I want to thank Erica Quallen for that question, and then pose one more to you that was upvoted, and that is from Andrew Perchlik. Can you speak to who is writing the climate action plan that will be brought to the council for a vote, is the question.
That's a very timely question, as that was the focus of a significant portion of our council meeting yesterday. And we have a plan that relies on staff from the Agency of Natural Resources, but other agencies of government. Jane Lazorchak is here today, and she's the director of the Global Warming Solutions Act for ANR, and will sort of be coordinating and leading those staff efforts. The actual actions and strategies will come up from the subcommittee, and in those subcommittees, I should say, in those instances, I'm sort of envisioning Jane will perform kind of a quality control function and ensure we're getting the same consistent level of information and specificity across all of the different submissions. And counselors will be elbow deep in this work over the next 3 months. This is really an all hands on deck moment. And we have laid out a schedule yesterday that shows when different sections of the plan will be distributed to counselors for review and feedback. A chunk approximately every 2 weeks for the next 8 weeks, as we really try to build that full draft of the plan, with the idea that there will be some, not much, but some time at the end of November where everyone will be able to have a look at the first full draft.
Thank you, Julie. So we're going to do a little bit of schedule adjustment